Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and we're here today with a bunch of friends for the Friday conversation, and we'll kick it off with some introductions. So, Randy, do you want to start us off?
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. I'm Randy Schroeder. I sometimes go by Randy Nikkel Schroeder among a sort of bevy of pen names that I've used over the years. And yeah, my latest novel is called Arctic Smoke. And in my spare time, I'm a professor at Mount Royal University. Oh, thanks, Mike. Yeah.
Nice. Prepared. And Mike?
Yeah, I'm Mike Thorn. I was taught by Randy Schroeder and read some of his work under the bevy of other names. I'm the author of Peel Back and See, Shelter for the Damned, and Darkest Hours. Yeah, looking forward to chatting.
Nice.
Yeah, my name is Niall Howell. I am, like Randy and Mike, I am a writer. My latest novel, There Are Wolves Here Too, just came out about a month ago. Oh, there's another one. Yeah. And yeah, I was also a student of Randy's. Mike and I did our undergrad degrees together. And when I am not writing, I teach high school English.
Wow. Nice. So I got to say, I was a little bit intimidated because when I received all of your photos for the thumbnail, you all have immaculate photographs. So it's great author pictures, just really great. So Neil, do you want to tell us about There Are Wolves Too? What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so this is my second novel. My first novel is called Only Pretty Damned, and it's my best attempt at which Mike has, Only Pretty Damned is like my attempt at like a Jim Thompson-esque, James M. Cain sort of traditional noir story. With There Are Wolves Here Too, I feel like I'm still in that wheelhouse. I feel like I still wrote a noir story, a crime fiction story. But this one, I think more than anything else, is a coming of age story. So it's about a young boy named Robin who's growing up in a fictional Alberta city called Haddington Springs in 1997. And he is one of the last people to see his friend's little sister before she disappears. So because he lives in this very tight-knit community, this young girl's disappearance has a ripple effect that really finds its way to everybody in the small community. And in trying to make sense of what happened while the rest of the town is becoming either paranoid or suspicious of one another, Robin and his friends, in an attempt to understand what happened, start to uncover some pretty dark truths about their home and about themselves and the people closest to them. There's my elevator pitch for that one.
Nice. And what is it? What's the feeling like for all of you? What's the feeling like to be working on a book and pour so much of yourself into it, and it's finally out there? What is that feeling like when it's released, when it's out in the wild?
For me, I'd say an equal mix of joy and fear and anxiousness, just all meshed together. There's a little bit of everything. You're excited that it's done. You're excited to see what people think of it, but you pour so much of yourself into it. So there is this sort of element of, I don't know, you get kind of on edge, just kind of waiting, twiddling your thumbs and waiting to see what happens when it takes on a life of its own.
What about you, Randy? What's that feeling like for you?
I may be an outlier, but I mean, I've only published 3 book-length works, but each time I sort of, I didn't feel much at all. So, it was this tremendous process of inflationary expectation and nerves. And then it comes out, and for me, I was just going, yeah. So I'm not saying it's disappointment, but it's just sort of, for me, a lot less of any emotion than I literally expected there to be. So I don't know. I think I'm probably an outlier on that one. I hope so. Mike?
I mean, I feel like I can relate to parts of what both of you guys said. I do feel like the first time I released a book, it was a lot more anticlimactic than I expected.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I expected. I was like, oh, now, I've done it. And it was just sort of, I don't know, there was this sort of vacant feeling. But I can also relate to what Neil's saying in the sense that, I don't know, I'm always really excited to hear what people think about it and to talk to people about the book if they've read it. But I also can relate to that feeling of nervousness. I'm like, I hope my parents don't read this. And they're really supportive, so they always do. And I'm like, fuck. I always write down a list of stories on the inside page for my mom, like, don't read these ones. And hopefully she does that. But, yeah.
I should have mentioned that. My whole family, my whole clan is on both sides is Mennonite Brethren, which is, for those of you who don't know that reference, it's like a super conservative sort of fundamentalist Christian thing. So I don't even tell any of them, including my parents. So I like the fact that you write for your mother which ones are appropriate for her sensibilities.
It leaves about 2 from each collection.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's good. And I think with a book, it's a little different because it takes a while for people to read it and to get feedback. So it's not like a movie where 2 hours later they're giving you feedback. It's a little different with a book. It takes a while for it to come back to you. So that must make it a little, little weird.
Yeah.
That feeling of sort of, is this it though? I can also relate to. I don't know if you guys have ever thought of it this way, but if you remember certain milestone birthday parties from when you're a little kid, and you wake up, or not parties, but like you wake up going like, oh, I'm 10 today, I'm in double digits, and then realizing that you feel the exact same in every possible capacity. I think there's some similarity there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like the day after Christmas.
Yeah.
That's it. Maybe
That's
next
it.
year.
Yeah. No,
I'm still anxious and insecure. What is this about?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wonder if you guys can relate to, I was feeling the other day, like I don't know. I keep saying I shouldn't jinx this, but I feel like I'm getting pretty close to being done with the next novel.
Oh,
And I'm feeling kind of sad in a way. Like I really liked spending time with these characters. And I don't think I've ever had that before. Maybe because in Shelter for the Damned, I'm kind of sticking mostly to a character who's not very fun to be around. It's kind of an anxious experience writing it. But I'm actually feeling sad about saying goodbye. It sounds kind of sentimental and weird, but I actually had that feeling the other night, and it was good to me.
I think the answer is to make it the first in the series. This will be your goosebumps, Mike.
I've been waiting for it.
Yeah.
We did have a couple of comments. Austin has dropped by, and our friend Chris Moen is here. Happy Friday, Chris. And Chadia.
Hello.
And Aaron.
Hello.
And Shannon Berry says, Randy, your beard is immaculate.
Thank you. I just trimmed it this afternoon.
Nice.
So nice of you to say.
And Scott McGregor is also here. That's quite a beard.
It's Melbillion.
And Chris has a question. Loving the guitar collection as well. Impromptu gig.
That's where they live. I don't think they're coming down today. Unless I was going to say unless Steve insists, but even so, I don't think.
Yeah. So so you guys have all known each other for a while. Then it sounds like you have a friendship that's gone on a while. What is it like for you, Randy, to have taught them and then you see their success and that they're writing their books? What's that like from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's in my opinion, it's by far the best part of teaching, right? And I don't know what the ratio is. Well, I don't even know how you would gauge who's successful and who isn't. But when you see, especially writing students, when you see them go on and, well, first of all, write really good stuff. So demonstrate that they've mastered the craft to the extent that they're, as good, if not better than you are. But then also to see them be rewarded for that craft, it's terrific. It's it's strange because you asked us just a few minutes ago what it's like when the book is published. That might be kind of empty of emotion for me, but when students go on and publish stuff, I find it very exciting. It's terrifically fulfilling, for sure.
Well, and I've got to say, I think without Randy, I don't know where I would have gone as a writer, because I didn't really pursue many writing courses during my undergrad. I think I felt some degree of self-awareness around, or self-consciousness, I guess, around genre, being into Stephen King and things like that. And I always carried that around in academic spaces. I think for the most part, I kind of relieved myself of that. But Randy was kind enough to allow me to do like a directed readings course, which is more of a directed writings course. Like, you introduced me to a lot of essays on the writing process, to narrative craft. I had heard a lot of people kind of brush aside the book Story by McKee, and it was actually tremendously useful for me to break down, how does story work? What is the structure of story? So yeah, huge thanks for that, for sure.
Oh, you're too kind. Thank you.
It's true.
Yeah, you guys have both sort of I feel like we're still bouncing ideas off each other in that same, like Randy I found to be such an inspiration when I was taking his class. And then anytime we meet up, just in terms of you guys, oh, do you guys hear that?
I think it's my end.
Oh yeah.
Sirens. Yeah, sorry about that.
You're in the apocalypse is starting over in your end and working its way towards us.
Exactly.
But just like anytime we meet up, just in terms of like the influence that you guys have, I feel like we all have Post-it notes and pens out all the time because we're talking about the stuff we're reading, and there's just this frantic scribbling going on during every one of our chats. But it's writing such a solitary gig, so it's cool to just maintain these connections and have people to bounce ideas off of and share your influences with. And on that note too, Randy, I should mention I just got my first Crumley book today.
Oh, good.
I forget which one I even ordered. Something Kiss, The Last Kiss.
Last Good Kiss.
Last Good Kiss, yes.
Yeah.
So eager to dive into that one.
Oh yeah, that's a great one.
We did have a question from Aaron. How do you balance teaching loads with writing?
That's a good question. Now I'm on a half sabbatical, so the balance is really easy because all I do is wake up and write. I find I'd be interested to know, Aaron, if you're a teacher as well, and Neil, I know you are. I find I can't really do that much when I'm actually in the semester, like especially if I'm marking. I don't. It's not that I don't have the time. I don't have the energy to actually do much writing. I'll record ideas if they come. So I have to kind of fit it in the spaces between. And by the spaces between, I generally mean not like at the end of a teaching day, but when the semester's over, when I'm not marking and reading and preparing and what have you. So, that means summer, sort of Christmas, reading breaks, etc. And it's hard, yeah. There's no doubt the two, you'd think the two would align really nicely. It would be a good job for a writer, but I'm not always sure it is. There's the sort of type and style and intensity of mental energy you need are quite similar. So it almost feels like ending a teaching day and then doing more of the same. I don't know, Neil, what do you think?
I find it difficult right now, especially. I have my wife and I have a 1-year-old son, so that's really thrown my routine is no longer a routine, which I'm fine with. But I think otherwise I've always been really good at compartmentalizing things. So I was able to during these first couple books just really give myself as much of a rigorous routine as I was able to. Like I'd get up really early, or weekends I would get up really early and have set aside time. Holidays and like Christmas and like summer holidays those are like your golden times where you're not bound by a schedule. But I think it was just establishing habits, and then also giving myself not really quotas, but just being realistic with how much I could accomplish. I didn't want to just crank something out for the sake of having written something and then have it not go anywhere. I was really trying to be cognizant of what I was trying to accomplish, so that helped.
And Mike, you teach as well, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I do. I'm not currently teaching. I'm kind of co-teaching a year-long intro to modern lit course, but I'm not teaching this semester. I'm just sitting in on the other instructor's lectures and kind of watching what she's doing. I had one guest lecture this semester. But yeah, no, I can, I definitely can relate to what Randy's saying. I do think there's something about the mental energy piece. I did once when I was teaching college composition in English. I would wake up at 5 a.m. every day and write until 7, get ready for work, go teach. But I found I kind of crashed after a while. I found it really hard to sustain that. So it's a difficult thing to manage for sure.
I should add that for me anyway, finally, after really decades, coming to a kind of writing process that works for me, but more importantly, a writing process that's highly articulated in that I know I could separate out the very small tasks that I have to do and know quite clearly what kind of energy I need for each of those tasks. That's really helped too. And now I can kind of slice the writing process sometimes even into a teaching day, because I know what I need to do, and I know what kind of resources I need to complete that particular task. So that's really helped me. I don't know about you two, but I do kind of know about you two, but not everyone does.
Yeah, I wish I had the level of self-awareness and introspection as you have. I feel like my writing process, so much of it is just like sitting down and groping around in the darkness and just, having only the faintest notion of what I'm trying to accomplish at any given time. But that's probably why my editing for me is such an uphill battle, because I overwrite or I have to kind of look at the different tangential things that have happened while I'm writing and figure out how to narrow the focus to whatever it is I'm trying to accomplish. But yeah, Randy, I'm envious of your focus for sure, man.
Well, you're a natural. That's what I'm envious of.
Sure, but okay. I don't know.
Yeah, Randy sent us some pictures of his work in progress. And how many binders full is it you have of notes? And like your outline is longer than the novel sometimes, you said, right?
Usually, yeah. Well, you know what? You can... Oh, no, sorry. The corkboard's empty now. So never mind the corkboard. I don't know. I have two file... what do you call it? File boxes full of files, and then a big binder that looks like... Where's my camera? There. That's sort of the current chap. It's ridiculous. I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah.
And I do believe Aaron teaches history, if I'm not mistaken. Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong. And trying to write for the holidays. Right. And Chris, I can't even get a YouTube video recorded mid-semester. Never mind the bigger projects.
Hear ya.
Yeah.
Don't you find though it kind of helps you stay sane in a way? Like I don't feel right when I don't have something going on. So even if during a busy semester I don't touch it as much, I like knowing that it's there in some shape, in some form, right?
Yeah.
And I am definitely closer to Neil in terms of process, kind of groping in the dark. I like that description. But
there might have been a better way for me to put that, but
maybe not. Okay, let's say fumbling in the dark.
Yeah, fumbling.
Fumbling in the dark.
Groping,
Fondling.
Wandering in the dark. Yes,
that's what I heard, and I was like, no.
Maybe we should just avoid any hand-related metaphors.
Yeah.
But I'm finding like this time around with the novel I'm working on, I'm really enjoying editing, which is weird. Like I'm really excited to edit. I don't know. That's a new feeling for me. Normally I'm like, fuck, now I have to make sense of this thing.
No, I hear you.
Yeah. I enjoy editing. It's I wait for my edits with like some degree of anticipation, and also dread again. There's a common theme here with me. But I always enjoy just even seeing. It's cool because you don't know your own blind spots. And my editor for There Are Wolves Here Too, Claire Kelly with New West, with Randy and I are both with have both published books with New West. Her and I were really on the same wavelength, so I was always really eager to see her feedback because like 99% of the time we clicked, or she was able to find some sort of a blind spot that I wasn't aware of. But yeah, I always looked forward to it.
Yes, and our friend Layla is also here. Layla is an English professor. This is affirming to hear other teachers discuss mental energy in writing. I end up writing shorter pieces and articles mid-semester, even though I want to write longer book length drafts.
Yeah. Yeah, my old chair at the university I used to work for, he was just stunned when I had a novel out and had written it during, I don't know, a few years, but during work. So I think that's pretty common feel. And I don't know if this is true, but I've heard, like at the university I work at, my creative writing can count as my scholarship. So in other words, it can count as a required part of my job. And I've heard that at some universities, even in English departments, even for creative writing instructors, That's not necessarily the case, which sounds ludicrous and probably is. But yeah, it's tough.
Oh man, that's insane. I mean, that's why
Isn't
I
that
chose.
weird?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I chose to do a PhD in creative writing, not
Yeah.
English literature, because I thought if I keep just focusing on literary analysis, although I love it, it's also a different kind of thinking. Maybe love it is an exaggeration. There are things about it I appreciate. I love writing. I am a writer. So I want to find something that affords me the ability to do that while also paying the bills. So hopefully I can find a program that is sane about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Aaron is a history teacher. Yeah. So
Okay.
that one right.
Cool.
And so before we went, and just want to say hello to Bookends and Biscuits. Thanks for coming by from the UK. And before we went live, we were a little short discussion about point form writing, and I have to say I'm not familiar with it. So, what is point form writing?
Well, I don't know if it even is a thing. It's just something I stumbled onto because for years I've been trying to figure out a way. You know what? Maybe I should back up a bit and explain my axioms here. I believe, so maybe not all your viewers do, but I believe as a writer that the fundamental units or the stuff of writing is not actually language, or the stuff of story, narrative, not poetry, but of narrative. It's not language. It's actually beats or turns. It's structural stuff, right? So to me, it's probably likely that a story is going to end up in some linguistic form, but not inevitable. So I've been trying for years to figure out a way for myself to actually get the language out of the way if that makes any sense, when I'm constructing and shaping a story, so that I can kind of see with as much clarity as possible what the actual beats are, what the sort of emotional turns and reversals and movements and rhythms, I guess, rhythms and compositional pieces of the text are. So I just, I don't know, about a month ago, I thought, well, what would happen if I just quite literally cut out as much language as I could? And I don't mean suddenly I was writing in icons. That may be coming, but so I wasn't just, hey, that's probably on the way. No, so I thought, if I cut out as much of the linguistic stuff as I can, and I'm still working with language, but what I'm working with is phrases, right? I'm not working with sentences, and I'm not working with modifiers or descriptive bits. I'm just putting down phrases that describe as succinctly as possible what the rhythmic or structural component is right there. And it may not work for anyone else, but for me, it's really working well. I suddenly don't have all that linguistic stuff in the way, and I can see what the rhythm is. And then for me, going back and just kind of adding in a bit of language, and maybe there's some description here, that's a necessary detail, but it's not the most important detail. And again, that's my own particular view of story, may not be shared. So it's been working for me. I don't know if anyone has ever done it before, but it's working for me.
I mean, you've got me thinking about the function of rhythm in sentences, though, too, right? Because even down to each individual sentence, there is a sort of cadence. It's like, so in a way, it's thinking, I don't know, there's a kind of way that the micro and the macro aspects of the process are working. I don't know.
Yeah, and I should also say that for me, this might be a bit contentious, but for me, language is, I don't mean for me personally, I mean, to me, or in my opinion, for anybody, the language is the easy part. I think a facility, even a beauty or a stylistic facility with language, that's not a terrifically difficult skill, I don't think. The skill of being able to construct both the macro and then all the way down fractally to the micro units of story, that to me is hard. And I think that's reflected in the fact that so many people fail at it. So many films, so many mainstream novels even fail at it. To me, and again, this may be contentious and people may want to argue, and that's fine. But to me, language is just a matter of, do you have enough time to groom it? And some people might be out there thinking, wait a minute, are you saying that you think poetry is easier than story? Yes, I definitely do. Definitely. That's my opinion.
My poet friends are going to come at you, Randy.
I know.
I mean, I'm super fussy about language, probably to a detriment. I 100% agree that the most difficult thing is plot, is story, without a doubt, to me as a writer. I mean, for me as a writer, that is by far the most arduous part of the process, is determining how the thing, the rhythms of the thing, and does it make sense, and does it all fit together? But I am very fussy with language, probably to a fault. And sometimes that might get in the way of focusing on the macro or story. I don't know. How about you, Neil? Because your new book is very plot driven.
Yeah, but with both my books, I'm not much of a plotter. So I was actually going to ask you how that maybe factors in terms of like plot. Like you and I both don't really plot. Like, am I correct with that? Like we with my writing, I don't even really have certain themes. I'll usually have a setting and certain tones that I think of. And then I feel like I'm figuring out plot, theme is something that sort of starts to take shape as well. But yeah, I wonder if I don't know if one has to do with the other maybe, or I just wonder how, like plot being the difficult thing, like how do we write these stories then?
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if you're the same in the sense that we both, I mean, all three of us love film. We all love music. I have no musical ability. These guys are actual musicians. But I think there's something about loving all of these forms. I was talking to a friend the other day, and I feel like for me as a writer, I'm after a certain kind of texture. And that might seem like a weird word, but yeah, it's a certain atmosphere, a certain texture. Like that's what brings me into the story. And then I sort of find the plot, but it's often through revision, right? Isn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Like most of my revision is making sure that the plot lines up, but I wonder if it's like a subconscious fear, because I can say, oh, my process is that I just kind of feel it out, or not, venturing into the darkness, and we'll see what we uncover, not grope. But is it because I just have this like fear or aversion to plotting? Like I don't know what the plot is until I've spent 2 years writing the book, and then there's this strenuous amount of backpedaling and going back and trying to make it this focused thing. I'm not sure.
You know what my feeling is about you two guys? So can I do that? I think you're both actually really good at plot, but maybe you're not articulating that to yourselves, because I think, well, for me anyway, plot, there's no such thing as plot in the abstract, right? Plot always arises out of character. And it arises well out of character when the author knows who the character is in terms of, all those cliches, motivation, psychological complexity, etc. So I think both of you are really skilled at creating characters, and plot will grow out of what characters do and why they do it, right? I mean, I don't know of any writer that's ever been able to concoct a plot in the abstract and then populate the plot with characters. I mean, not even the creakiest James Bond film would work that way, right?
Yeah.
So I think you should give yourselves credit. You're just maybe you're just naturally skilled at plot, where the rest of us have to not grope, toe suck in the dark. I don't know. Whatever.
That's the term we were looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Toe sucking in the TSOND.
Yeah.
Mason in the Dark says, I find that both mediums have their challenges. Poetry doesn't come as easily to me.
Yeah, I was being a little wry. I shouldn't have said that. That was I don't even know that much about. I was speaking from ignorance.
I think you should volunteer 20 hours of community service at some sort of poetry convention or symposium.
Yeah, like getting the coffee and donuts.
Yeah.
You're probably right.
And Robin had a comment. Not sure if I missed, but the book that recently won the Arthur C. Clarke Award was a poetry storybook and involved different languages.
That could be.
Where do we place Paradise Lost? That's just like the penultimate poetry and story at their finest.
Yeah, or Beowulf, or Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And Mason in the Dark says, Toe Sucking in the Dark is my OnlyFans channel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be our next album title.
Yeah, gotta write that down.
Yeah. Future book titles. So, Randy, I see a lot of instruments behind you. What's your favorite instrument to play?
Probably the guitar. I mean, I've played the guitar since I was 15, so that's a long time. That's many decades. But I really getting into playing the bass, which Neil is an accomplished bass player. But Neil, there's something about the bass, right? Because it's probably the most, or can be the most rhythmic string instrument of all. And there's something super cool about, for me anyway, rhythm is the most interesting aspect of music to me. So there's something really fun about digging into the bass and trying to hold together both the melodic lines, or what they sometimes call the tonic, but also get that rhythmic sensibility. And I've also been playing a lot of mandolin lately. Mandolin to me is the forgotten rhythmic stringed instrument, because it's got such, if you don't know instrumentation, the string tension is so tight that you can get a lot of rhythmic sort of kind of sounds. I've been wondering lately, why isn't the mandolin the main instrument in funk? So maybe that's coming. But, right?
Yeah.
Mandolin funk bands. That's what we need to see.
What about you, Neil? Do you have a favorite instrument?
Yeah, literally the only instrument I play is bass. So I've been playing that since I was like 14. Yeah, I love playing bass. I'm in awe and envious of Randy's ability to pick up instruments and just shred on them. But bass has just always been the instrument for me. Yeah.
Nice.
But I'm curious about mandolin now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Layla had a comment. What do the panelists think about the NaNoWriMo project that is popular in November to write 50,000 words in 30 days?
I mean, all power to people who want to do that. I don't know. I'm impressed if people are able to write 50,000 words in 30 days, but I know if I were to write 50,000 words in 30 days, they would probably be awful, but maybe that's just kind of accepted as part of the process, and then the editing comes later. I have never done NaNoWriMo. I just don't like the sound of it even. I don't like the like NaNoWriMo. I don't want to participate in anything that sounds like NaNoWriMo. So, but no, if it's something you like, all power to you, and yeah, Godspeed.
I'm kind of embarrassed to say I didn't actually know what it was until someone at my writers group said, "Are you ever into NaNoWriMo?" I'm like, I don't. Is that like, that sounds perverse to me? Probably not. And there's a lot of writer stuff, especially online writer stuff, and even acronyms that I just don't know. I'm quite naive that way.
I was going to say part of my process is to just NaNoWriMo in the dark and kind of find the plot that way. Yeah, I've also never done it. I totally agree with Mike. Power to people who can do it. It's just my process is so sluggishly slow by comparison. So I feel like that's one thing to do, and I'm just kind of slogging away on a different track. But I think it's cool when people get really into it. The few people that I know who try it, I'm always in awe of just how committed they are to making it happen. And just like the fact that someone can come up with 30,000 words or 50,000 words rather in such a small amount of time, where it will take me a year to write 50,000 words, is impressive to me, but just not my thing.
Isn't there a publisher in Canada that either does or used to have a contest where you write a novel in 7 days, I think?
Wow.
And then then you submit it and the winner gets it published. I can't remember with the press, but so there are people who can do it
in 7 days. Wow. Do they edit it before they publish it?
I don't remember, but you'd think, right?
Yeah, I think it needs some work.
Yeah.
Shannon had a comment. As a bunch of writers who produce generally unconventional stuff, do you have anything you have written that you think is too weird to send out? That's a great question.
Yeah. I now, do we focus on? Do you think it's too weird, or was it too weird? Mike, I feel like you should go first.
I mean, hi Shannon. First of all, Shannon's great. We all know Shannon.
Yeah.
I mean, I work within the capital W weird tradition, so the weirder the better. You know, I've written stuff that's too bad to send out, definitely. So if we want to use that as like a synonym for weird, like weirdly bad, there are definitely pieces that I just couldn't work into something that I was satisfied with. That's really the only case that I wouldn't send something out. Like, I basically try to work everything I write into something that I'm pleased with, and I send out. I really don't throw away a lot of stuff. Yeah, a couple pieces that were originally in the manuscript for Darkest Hours, the original publisher said, I want this book, but I don't want this story and that story. And in retrospect, I'm very glad that he did, because I look back at those stories and I think, Jesus Christ, I was going to publish those. So that's the only case when that has happened for me.
Yeah, if I'm spending time on it, I at least have the intention of getting it out there. But anything that hasn't is probably just bad, just plain bad. So I've never like written anything and been like, oh, it's too bizarre for this world, and then I lock it up and throw it to the bottom of a lake or anything.
Take this.
We love that shit, the weird stuff.
Yeah. So I write pretty much everything with the intention of it going somewhere, and if it hasn't, there's good reason.
Now, I've been told by many editors, I'd say probably upwards of 90%, that it's too weird to publish.
Yeah, you're the person to answer this.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've told this story to you guys many times, but I think in the late 90s, I decided I would collect all my rejection letters, and I stopped at 500. So,
wow.
I'm sure I'm getting close to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a sentiment I'm very familiar with, an editorial sentiment for sure.
Wow.
But would you ever screen yourself, Randy? Like, would you ever write something and think, I can't put this out there, I went too far, or whatever it might be? Has that ever happened?
No, I'm with Neil on that one. I've never sort of sat in my dark
Nano
in my dark
Yeah.
room.
Yeah.
I go, nobody will be able to take this. I can't unleash this.
I think
never happened. No.
Have you guys, if you've read the foreword to Pet Sematary by Stephen King, that one edition where he talks about when he reached the end of the novel, how he's like, this is when I finally went too far.
Yeah.
But the fact that he reached the end of the novel by the time he hit that conclusion, I just imagine him, like, was he just writing it and then it occurred to him like, and the end? Oh God, what have I done? Or was it just him typing away and being like, what am I doing? No, stop. Right? So I wish I could have been a fly on the wall.
You're like
Tabitha,
on
restrain my hand.
I mean, don't you think like when you're going into uncomfortable territory, that's when the best art happens? I mean, it's a cliche probably, but I think that's
I think so.
Yeah,
that's something I believe.
Totally.
And we should say, because we know Shannon, that she does multiple types of art. It's pretty weird, but in a good way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
don't want to see it any other way.
Yeah, Shannon's great.
Mm-hmm. And Mason in the Dark said, writing 50K in 30 days is easy. I just have to not eat, sleep, both, or do anything other than write until my fingers bleed.
That's all.
No problem.
No big deal.
Yeah. And Robin said, NaNoWriMo is really popular on Twitter. And I think that's part of it, is having that group to kind of push each other and having the, kind of somebody to cheer you on.
Mm-hmm.
I hear it's popular on OnlyFans too, as well.
Watching people write under stuff.
Yes. Hot.
I like to watch people write.
I'm sure there's someone out there who does. There's got to be, right? You guys can make a killing on OnlyFans. Austin said, I'm a very novice writer, but I was wondering if you all had some tips on writing dialogue, since that is easily where I'm the weakest. Thank you in advance.
Yeah. That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Randy, you brought up something interesting once on dialogue that really stuck with me. It's watching, just in terms of when do characters tell each other something that they already know, right? Like some of the most painful dialogue to read is not just the expository, but just when people are like reminding, it sounds like The Room. It's like, but you love Johnny because he's your husband and he's a loyal person, like that kind of stuff. Just, I don't know. I think sparse dialogue is where it's at. I'm a minimalist, I think, with dialogue.
Yeah, it's a tricky. I mean, I think we all sympathize or identify with you, Austin, because that's really difficult. And the cliche, I think, among screenwriters is characters are not people, dialogue is not conversation. So for my 2 cents, I would say I'd kind of back in and say the thing you don't want to do is try and provide a transcript of how people really talk. Like the worst thing you could do is, go to a coffee shop and kind of listen to how people know, right? But yet it's got to sound real. So it's a really tricky paradox. And ideally you want to give each character their own distinctive voice. But if you actually, took the dialogue and put it in a linguistic transcript and had a linguist look at it, they'd say, this is absolutely nothing like how real people speak. And yet on the page, it's like, yeah, that's how that person would speak. And I wish I had even more specific advice, but I guess I could recommend, and I get no kickback, Robert McKee's book called Dialogue is pretty good, I found. More, better organized than story. What do you think, Mike?
I mean, it's really interesting. I was just on Plagued by Visions the other day with my friend Aaron Vance. Someone asked this exact same question, and I sort of fumbled a response. So I'll try to come up with something different this time. I mean, something I discovered with the book I'm working on now, there were sections where it was a little too exposition heavy. Certain things had to be revealed. I think it's okay to get the exposition, kind of clunky exposition stuff down in a rough draft. This is when editing comes in handy. You know what the character is actually saying. And then you can kind of find a more abstracted, coded way for them to say it, because this is actually often how we communicate. We don't come right out and say, hey, you're too invasive at parties or something. We find a kind of more abstracted way, or you like, hey, Todd, your armpits smell really bad. You might find some other like coded way of saying these things. So I do find sometimes just having it very clear and direct in the rough draft is perfectly okay. And then, but is what I said on Juan's channel, and I'll just say it again, is I think if you really know your characters going in, dialogue comes more easily. And we could all probably also recommend novels that we think have especially good dialogue. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the way Don DeLillo writes dialogue, and it's like how aliens would speak. There's nothing human about it, but it's like my favorite dialogue.
I think too, this is probably a cliche at this point, but I think too, studying both playwrights and screenwriters might even be more efficient or a faster route than novelists. Mm-hmm. And just off the top of my head, some of the earlier Woody Allen films, I think, can yield a lot of insight into how to make that dialogue crackle. I'm thinking of Annie Hall, because in Annie Hall, the characters speak to each other in usually very short sentences. And the sentences, like Mike was saying, they never mean exactly what they mean on the surface, right? And you could almost do a clip where what they say out loud is contrasted with what they mean in a subtitle. There's always it makes what they say kind of makes sense emotionally, but the subtext is slightly different. And I think, even more than the language one uses, making that kind of tension or friction between the subtext, even just the emotional subtext, and then the explicit words, that gives the dialogue a kind of crackle that readers will pick up on, even though they might not, they might not be thinking, oh, wait, he really means this, but they sort of get it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mike, I liked what you said about abstraction too, and going along with what Randy said as well. Just like keeping that in mind, and that readers assume that they're as smart as you are, right? So in terms of just picking up on the subtleties and nuances of language, sometimes the beauty of it lies in the abstraction, and there's that, I think there's sort of a joy to be found in connecting those dots when they're there for you.
For sure. And also, I just wanted to pick up what Randy was talking about with listening to conversations in coffee shops and things like that. I think if you're a writer, or maybe I should just speak for myself, when I'm engaged in communication or listening to conversation, it might be partially because I'm a writer. I do pick up on the kind of energy more than anything. I pick up on the implications. I pick up on the subtext. That's the interesting stuff. The ums and uhs and half-finished clauses, like that doesn't work in prose. You want to retain the reality of the energy, but for it to work in prose. So it is a difficult balance to manage, but.
Yeah, and that's William Gibson, the author of Neuromancer and the Peripheral and all that stuff. He was describing how he came up with his dialogue, and he said he would, for Neuromancer back in the 80s, and he said he would go into arcades. I don't know if everyone knows what an arcade is, but I hope you do. And he said, I wouldn't actually steal the language, but I would, how do you put it, groove on the poetry. So I think that's what you were referencing there. And the other thing too, when it comes to dialogue, I wouldn't be afraid to just read good books craft books on the subject. I know there are some good articles by Orson Scott Card. I'm not sure off the top of my head where you'd find them, but some good articles with really practical ideas about how to sharpen the dialogue. One that springs to mind off the top of my head is, he said, sometimes it's interesting if characters don't respond directly to each other. Some character will ask a question and the other character doesn't provide an answer. They see something else. And as an author, you know why. And the reader might not know explicitly, but it just gives it that sizzle. So I wouldn't be afraid of looking to good craft instruction.
Really interesting. And Shannon said, well, that's where you and I differ. So it sounds like Shannon's felt like she's gone too far sometimes.
Those are the stories I want to read.
Yeah.
As you know, Bob, that's what you're talking about, Neil.
Yeah.
It's like, well, as you know, Bob, when we were on that case before.
We are, in fact, married.
Yeah.
So thank you for the great question, Austin.
That's a good question.
And Drew is here. Happy Friday. I'm a little late, so I apologize if this has already been discussed, but I was wondering if there are any stories that were formative in pushing you down the writer path.
For me, Stephen King, for sure. Pretty much anything by him, but I think Salem's Lot was the one that really helped light the spark. And then all the work of Raymond Chandler, but The Big Sleep, the first novel that I read by him, was really formative in making me want to write. Just in terms of going back to dialogue and style, that was, and I see also Billy Wilder's work, Sunset Boulevard, Double Indemnities mentioned here in the chat as well. But that sort of golden age noir stuff was something that I just found so cool and stylish, and it just made me want to try to emulate that. And if I'm talking about Chandler as well, I'm just thinking about dialogue here too. I guess that a lot of his intention for writing was to just experiment with language. So as much as he's associated with being this guy who was a crime writer and a pulp writer, it really just came from a desire to have fun with American, what he thought of as street language at the time. But yeah, Chandler's huge influence on me for sure. Even though I don't think my writing is anything like Chandler's, I'm always, thinking about Chandler while I write.
In the dark.
In the dark. Well, what was it? Nanobot? Me and my nanobots. Yeah. What about you guys?
Well, this is a little embarrassing, but the first fiction I really grooved on madly was the Hardy Boys. So I started with the kind of crime fiction, but then like Neil, I really picked up on a lot of noir and noir stuff. And then by the time I was a teenager and I read William Gibson's Neuromancer, I was like, what? You could take hard-boiled language and noirish tropes and use it in other genres? And, then I was off to the races, as we used to say.
It's a hard question to answer, hey, because I feel like there are different books that were very formative at different times in my life. Like the books that got me interested in reading, and I don't think one can write, certainly not write well if one doesn't read a lot, would be J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. Like I love the fantasy stuff as a kid. Like Neil, as a teenager, Stephen King was huge. For me, the gateway was Pet Sematary. But then in like my late teens, early 20s, I discovered Kathy Koja, read The Cipher, and it just kind of broke everything open for me and really reformulated the way I thought how I might be able to approach the genre. Hubert Selby Jr. was another one in high school, when it just the viciousness and the kind of the music of the language, the intensity of the books. That was something I was like, I want to write like that. And like Neil said about Chandler, I don't think I write anything like these people, but they're all over my DNA as a reader and as a writer. So Jim Thompson as well, another one.
Oh yeah. Yeah, ditto Thompson.
So good.
Uh-huh.
And Carlos, our friend Carlos, is here watching Double Identity by Billy Wilder open a whole new world for me when it comes to dialogue. Nor at its best. Cheers, amigos.
That's my favorite. I watch Double Indemnity at least a couple times a year. It's
Who
it's
did
a
the
comfort
screenplay?
movie.
Do you remember?
Raymond Chandler did this.
Chandler, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Holy shit! I didn't.
Yeah.
I forgot
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
It's so
I have to
weird. And
rewatch it.
one of the best parts of the movie is Chandler makes a cameo. So he's
Yeah.
this sort of disgruntled looking guy sitting in the insurance office. But,
I haven't seen it since I was like 13, and at the time, Chandler wasn't on my radar. So holy shit! Yeah,
that's one
Isn't
of
that
those
wild?
things too. Oh yeah,
Chandler adapting
Wilder.
King.
crazy.
Yeah.
That's
It's Wilder.
Oh my
Yeah.
god! Yeah, no kidding.
And it's funny too because Chandler, I think, loathed Kane on some level. Like I remember reading a quote, and I'm going to botch it in my paraphrase, but Chandler referred to Kane's writing as calling him a dirty little boy with his head in the gutter. So I'm assuming it was the paycheck that enticed him to go write this. But going back to what we talked about, the dialogue in novels, but then also in films not being something that's supposed to exactly replicate real life dialogue. Double Indemnity is just that to a T. Nobody talks like that. Like Edward G. Robinson in that film is just this. He's like a caricature of a caricature almost at times, but just like the dialogue and his delivery is so slick and so cool that it sets the tone for the story, and that's what makes it so engaging. Is just this sort of snappy style that everybody has speaking to one another, right? The double meaning behind everything, all the innuendo, which I think some people misread as being tacky or cheesy, but I think it just sets the tone for the genre so perfectly. But yeah, love Double Indemnity.
Yeah.
Can I indulge in a noir nerd question now? Since Chandler adapted Kane, do you guys know if James M. Cain ever wrote screenplays? Because I love his novels.
I don't know if he did.
I don't know.
I've got to look into that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like he'd be great at it. I mean, Postman Always Ranks Twice is one of the most perfectly constructed books I've ever read, I think. Like,
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not either.
Yeah. It's interesting when you look at that era of like just who ended up writing screenplays. Like Faulkner wrote The Big Sleep, and you're just like, oh, they just got William Faulkner to Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And I heard Fitzgerald tried to break into but he couldn't figure it out the way Faulkner could.
I could see that being a disaster.
Yeah.
Here's your 900-page first draft of
written by Zelda.
Yeah, no kidding.
And Mason in the Dark, it's a simple one, but I think reading it aloud to yourself really helps.
Yeah.
Trying to craft it so it sounds natural and not just characters saying things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I don't know whether this is true or not, but it seems to me that something that is easier to say is easier to, well, easier is not the right word, but if it's smooth when you say it, if the, the repetition of consonants and the types of vowels, it I don't know if it maps on exactly, but it probably stylistically when it's written, it also reads more smoothly or whatever effect you're going for.
Mm-hmm. It's often hard to identify the clunkiness of not just dialogue, but just your prose without actually reading it out loud.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be interesting to see a more rigorous study on that, whether whether reading a bunch of K's in a kind of chunk kind of clots up the same way it does if you try to say it. You know, like, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Chris said, Wilder's writing will do that. Sunset Boulevard and Double Indemnity are an incredible 1-2 punch.
Isn't Sunset Boulevard, that's Lynch's favorite film, right?
Oh yeah, I could see why.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Oliver's work too, hey?
Yeah, absolutely.
And our friend Layla had a question. Are they recommending McKee for novel fiction writing? I notice his books mention stage and screenplay.
What do you think, Mike, as someone who was sort of forced to take it?
No, I'm glad it was healthy medicine. No, I mean, I think a lot of the principles in there are directly transposable. If anything, screenplays are more like expressly kind of focused on utility. So in a way, you're seeing the skeleton of story really clearly. And then the prose and everything that comes with prose fiction, I guess, whatever. If I'm going to complete this metaphor, I don't want to say it's the muscles or something. But yeah, a screenplay sort of, for me, it is a kind of skeletal, really clear, distilled form of story, because a director looking at a screenplay has to be able to play with it and see exactly how does this thing move, how does this thing work, how is it going to work. I don't know. That's the way I see it anyway. But
yeah, agreed. But the only problem I find with McKee is the book itself. I don't know if it's that well organized.
No,
Like, you kind of have to take all of his insights and reconstruct them in a way that works for you. I think they're probably better how-to books. Maybe John Truby's book, Truby. I found that one really useful. It's also a screenwriting book, but I found it really applicable and really accessible. How about Dara Marks, Mike?
Don't get me started. Well, I mean, I don't want to throw shade at Dara Marks, but she has this really strong. Okay, so I think there is something to be said for writing that's focused on theme, and I've seen a lot of films and read a lot of novels that are like expressly theme focused, and they're incredible. But I think that her book is kind of anchored to the kind of foundational role of theme. You have to be expressing or articulating some theme. For me as a writer, that's just not at all intuitive, and it's not the kind of writing I want to do. Like, I'm not here to tell you something. I'm not here to teach you something. Like, I hate that shit. So I don't know. Yeah, I could say more about Dara Marks, but I don't know. It's kind of esoteric.
Yeah, and another one that I think some of my students anyway find really useful is Save the Cat. Save the Cat with an exclamation point. Now, originally that was a screenwriting kind of protocol, but there's an adaptation called Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I can't remember the author off the top, but a lot of students have found that really, really helpful. A kind of shortcut into the craft that would otherwise take so long to get a handle on. There's no shortage of narrative or story structure books out there, that's for sure. But McKee kind of, well, no, I guess Sid Field kind of started it, but McKee kind of really blew it up for everyone.
Sid Field's the screenplay Save the Cat, right? But he didn't do the novel one?
Sid Field was, I can't remember the name of it, but it was pre-Save the Cat, pre-McKee.
Oh, okay.
And it's kind of the first popular screenwriting manual, I think. Maybe not the first, but one of the first. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the Save the Cat novel book is helpful to look at too. Sure.
Yeah.
And Austin said, thank you all for that was very interesting and informative. I wouldn't have thought of things that way back, but that was really helpful.
Oh, thank you. Awesome.
And Jonathan is just sliding in to say, hey now. And Carlos said, I think Damon Knight creating short fiction is also a really good craft book.
I don't know that one. Can I write it down?
Of course.
Damon Knight.
Thank
you, Carlos. That's really helpful.
It's a good name for a horror writer, Damon Knight. Hey, wow.
I think it's a Tales from the Crypt movie too.
Yeah, yeah. I think he knows Sutter Kane.
Yes.
Michael Knight's twin brother. That was reaching back. That was a Knight Rider reference.
Oh, the Romero movie?
No,
Okay.
the 70s
Horse,
TV
yeah.
show.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
Okay.
Was Hasselhoff's character Michael? Knight?
Yeah, Michael
Or was
Knight.
the car's first name was Michael?
No, the car was Kit, I think.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. Come a long way, huh? Yeah. So, so mentioning movies, I think you mentioned, I forget which one of you mentioned you saw Halloween. What are your
Yeah.
the latest Halloween movie?
I'd seen it. I think Mike has as well. I was curious about 5 minutes in. I thought, I'm curious to know what Mike thinks about this.
I mean, I read a lot of critics saying that they thought the first half hour was interesting and then it sort of devolved. But I seem to have had an opposite reaction where the more it kind of came apart at the seams and got weirder and weirder, the more interesting I found it. Yeah, I don't know. I liked the risks that it took. I don't think it all works. I do appreciate the kind of no holds barred viciousness of the David Gordon Green movies, even though for some reason they're so brutal, but I find the violence has no impact. And I'm not sure what that's about. But I don't know. I like, to some extent, I can't not enjoy a movie that has Michael Myers stalk and slash sequences scored by John Carpenter. Like I'm a man of simple taste. So yeah, I liked it on some level. But how about you?
Totally. Yeah, when I saw that it was coming out and kind of hearing early things about it, I rolled my eyes. But then as soon as it's in theaters, I'm like, well, I need to go see it. I can appreciate them trying to do something different with a character and with a story that's just been, I think that's, if you're counting the zombie movies too, the 13th in that the Halloween saga. So it was cool to see a different spin on it. It felt kind of like Halloween fan fiction. I don't know. It had its moments, but not my favorite thing.
Yeah, it's a weird.
But yeah,
movie.
if it's October and I find myself in a theater and I get to hear the Carpenter score while looking at, even in the opening credits when there's just the pumpkin rotating, I don't know.
That was the best part of the movie.
Worth the price of admission for me. Is that first 5 minutes. The popcorn I had was also really good. Nothing. Yeah, it was fine. Good seat. Easy access to an aisle, so there were definitely perks of the experience. Yeah.
How did you feel about the Express Christine shoutouts? Corey Cunningham.
Yeah, that's how I felt about them. Yeah.
I don't think I'm the horror fan that you two are, but I'm very interested in some of the effects of horror and trying to learn from it. And I thought of, as you were speaking, I thought of Neil's book, There Are Wolves Here Too, because one thing that really, by the way, that's a great book and everyone should get it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So it's because it's not just noir. I mean, it is very noirish, and it's not just coming of age, but there's something kind of at the core, at the heart of that book that to me is very horror. And I don't want to, no spoilers, but there's this repeating image of a ravine and repeating setting of a ravine. And, for all that I blab on about narrative craft and story, what I'm most interested in when it comes to story is somehow when it's a good story and, it's well crafted and everything, but somehow at the heart of that story, there's something that is almost inexplicable. So, like the whale in Moby Dick, or the ravine, and There Are Wolves Here Too. So I wonder if you guys have any thoughts about what writers of all types might learn from horror. Maybe not even horror writers per se.
Thanks for your thoughts on that. And I love that you enjoyed the book. I think the horror undertones kind of found their way in naturally, and it really wasn't something where I went, oh, I want to write something that's noir and coming of age, but also has this sort of undercurrent of horror. But I think it works well with coming of age because that is the time of your life when you're in your sort of early adolescence, where you really believe in the supernatural, and these certain places in your life can have these very sort of ominous and magnetic pulls to them, right? Like everyone remembers like that the haunted house in their neighborhood when they were a
Mm.
kid, or like the kind of like forbidden places where you're like, oh, bad things happen there. So I thought it was something that lent itself well to the other two genres I was playing with. But
And there is something about the way like you capture that childlike point of view in the book that's just so, it's so convincing and it's so real. Like not only does it have this kind of vivid flashback for me of around the time I was growing up, but even that, like I remember Randy and I were both just celebrating the swimming pool sequence.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
I've never read a sequence that reminded me so much of that very specific setting at
Yeah.
that very specific age. It is that there's a kind of like vivid intake of input and experience when you're a kid it's hard to translate into writing, I find, and you just nailed that.
yeah, thanks, man. I'm glad you guys think so. That was what I was most nervous about, I think, while I was writing it. I felt like with this book I had a lot more, I was juggling a lot more with this one than I was with Only Pretty Damned, which I think is a bit more streamlined comparatively. Yeah, but thank you. Mike, what do you, I mean, you being the guy who's like the horror virtuoso, I think, what do you think about other writers learning things from horror? What can writers take from horror? What can the shopaholic, Confessions of a Shopaholic, take from Halloween 4?
Well, that's a very specific question, Neil. I mean, I don't know. I mean, something that always interests me that I brought up in many essays and many conversations is that horror is the only genre named after its desired affect. So that's really interesting. Thinking about the role of affect, the role of emotional response when you're reading. This is always at play in genres, but horror is the only one named after that kind of aspiration or goal, I guess you could say. So yeah, the role of affect, the role of atmosphere. And I also think horror, to me, by virtue of its kind of excesses and its refractions away from customary day-to-day reality, it's better able to access really uncomfortable truths in a very direct way. And that's what I'm after in fiction is that place of discomfort, that place of uneasiness, that place of voyeurism. So I think for me, horror does that best. Although something else we've all talked about a lot is how noir and horror are very closely aligned in that they're two genres that quite frequently fly in the face of the idea of having a protagonist whose agency drives the plot. Usually it's a kind of about a dissolution of agency or a dissolution of self. Yeah. So I don't know. Should we go on about that?
Well, it's a fascinating topic. Well, it's fascinating for us anyway.
Exactly. Someone out there.
But yeah, and as I was listening to you talk, I was reminded again that there are certain genres, like standard genres, right? Like listed on the bookstore shelf as such. But there are certain genres like noir and horror that they're just not quite like other narratives, right? Because if you're thinking about narrative from a neuroscientific point of view, narratives are, well, I believe anyway, narratives are, or the narrative form has been selected for, and it's probably the primary way that we organize information, including our own memories. And it's a way to, the story form is a way to simplify and manage and navigate what is otherwise a total excess, you use the word excess, a total excess of input. And so it's interesting that you have these two recognizable genres that are popular and that have established audiences, where almost the whole point is to find that weird balance between the regular story form, like the non-negotiable aspects that have to be there for story, like you mentioned, agency. Characters have to have some agency. But balance that with just enough like kind of demolition of narrative, whether that's excess or loss of agency, or in the case of The Ravine in Neil's latest novel, just a place where you can't really, like, what's going on? You can feel the intensity, but you don't have the words to describe it. And indeed, there probably are no words to describe it. It escapes both the linguistic and the narrative forms altogether. Now you go too far in that direction, and then you don't have a genre anymore, right? Then it's something experimental.
Mhm.
But you lose it altogether, or you lose too much of it, and you don't have horror, or you don't have noir. So they're interesting genres. I think they're quite different than just about everything else. And I think, Neil, you'd be a good one to talk about this, but I think that's what distinguishes noir from all of the sister forms under the umbrella of crime fiction. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, are you thinking then in terms of just like we talked about the lack of agency or loss of agency? Are you thinking in terms of just like structurally as well? Because if you think of like traditional mysteries as well, you know, whether it's a cozy or even certain detective stories, part of the appeal for people is the puzzle that you're getting, right? Whereas in noir, it's just supposed to be like the structure of a person's life at times, right? And the structure of the story itself just kind of floating and spiraling into chaos, which there again, I think is another overlap into horror as well, right? Like I think there's shades of that actually in Mike's novel, Shelter for the Damned as well. When you look at just the spiral that the protagonist takes from the beginning of the story to as he's drawn into the shack, and it's just this total like plunge into the chaos.
Yeah, and I was thinking.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to make another groping in the darkness comment. It's not even there. Yeah. So let's go with whatever you were going to say.
Well, I was just, as you were speaking, I was also thinking of so many of those just weird scenes in Jim Thompson novels. So Jim Thompson being like one of the probably two really classic noir writers. And sometimes things just go crazy. Like they get so surreal. And there's a breakdown in the point of view, and there's a breakdown in the narrative. And I can't remember the title of that book where the kid. Never mind. I don't
Is it
want
The Getaway? Are you thinking The Getaway?
The Getaway, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
Remember the ending of The Getaway?
It's absurd. It's insane. Yeah.
And it's horrifying.
And it's a huge influence on Shelter for the Damned. Like at Jim Thompson, that was like my model. It was prose style and just in terms of that dissolution of everything. The end of The Getaway is A Hell of a Woman. Have you guys read that one?
Oh yeah,
right. Fuck, he's so good.
And it's fascinating because I think the narrative structure is almost by definition a way to process information that provides comfort and security, and sort of the ability to manage and shape information. So even if it's a super violent thriller or something, it's got that comfort to it, right? And readers will expect that. Horror, as you were saying, Mike, not so much. And noir readers too will allow you to kind of stray from that narrative comfort in a way that I think no other genre other than horror, and perhaps some comedy will, right?
I think noir is maybe even more dependent on that descent and dissolution, because there are horror novels where the monster is defeated at the end.
True.
And aside from like some Hays Code noir adaptations, that sort of flies in the face of noir, doesn't it? Or am I mistaken? You know better than me, Neil.
Sorry, the Hays Code. I know the Hays Code. Does it fly in the? Oh yeah, totally. Where they're
like
trying
happy
to
endings.
Yeah, they're trying to impose order onto it. Yeah, and those. Yeah, that's exactly it. I think, which is why so many films from that era, I think they just become lost, and sometimes it's like the remaining 10 seconds of the film, right, where you just get thrown for a loop, and you're, oh my god, what's happened to the protagonist? This is the most bizarre story ever. How did he get away with this? And you're just left with all these questions, and then off screen there will be like the sound of a siren, a gunshot, and looks like we got him, fellas. Like, too bad he didn't learn that crime doesn't pay or something like that. And there's a certain kitsch factor, I think, with those hilarious tacked on endings, but yeah, it does really, I think, defy what the genre is supposed to be. You bringing up A Hell of a Woman too, Mike. Oh, sorry to cut you off.
No,
I just
go ahead.
Just in terms of like what the hell is going on, I reread that one recently, and I forgot just how bizarre that ending is. Yeah,
That's
recommended for anyone who hasn't read it. A Hell of a Woman by Jim Thompson. It's just
Yeah.
you start off
massive
with a door-to-door salesman, and you end up somewhere far, far, far from that. Sorry, Steve, I cut you off though.
No, I was just going to mention that all these, to anyone watching or listening, all the links to their websites are in the description. So go check out their books. And I also wanted to ask you, Neil, about, I want to be sure I get this right, but your debut, Only Pretty Damned, was shortlisted for the Kobo Emerging Writer Prize for Literary Fiction. I wanted to ask you what that was like for you.
Oh yeah, that was really cool. That was an unexpected surprise. I actually found out about that because one of my favorite fellow crime authors and just a stellar author all around, Sam Weeb from Vancouver, sent me a Twitter message just saying, "Hey, congratulations!" And I don't think there was any context beyond that. So I just remember this was right in the thick of the first wave of COVID, and I remember just checking that and going like, "Congrats for what?" And then he clarified, and then I looked into it. But yeah, it was cool to get nominated for that. I was in the other books that were nominated, and the book that won as well. Who, now that I'm on the spot, I totally can't remember the name. Flying Plantation. I forgot. I'd have to look it up. But just so many stellar books. It was just cool to be in that category and get that little the spotlight for a brief amount of time on that one. But yeah, it was just very cool.
And on the topic of horror, I wanted to ask all of you what the appeal of horror is to you. What about the genre is it that you enjoy?
Horror.
Horror, yeah.
That's a hard one, eh? Because it's weird when you think the three of us have actually talked about this quite a bit. Why would we are we so maladjusted that we could only write and really only like to read these really down endings?
The answer is yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love the in both horror and noir and other narratives. I just love the hopeless unraveling of things. I don't want it to be put back together. I don't really know why. I don't know what that says about me, but I'm not looking for that tidy bow at the end that makes me sigh and think, okay, everything's all right in that world. I just want to be sort of driven out into the, now I'm searching for a metaphor, driven out into the dark countryside and thrown out the door on a moonless night where there are wolves howling beyond the mesa.
I mean, it's interesting because I agree with all of that, but a weird thing for me is like in real life, I'm really anxious. I don't want disorder. I want everything. I want to know how everything's going to go. Sometimes to a fault, I really have to kind of manufacture things so that I'm safe, so that I'm not going to, I'm always like thinking at any moment's notice, I could end up on the streets. It's just like, I have this kind of anxiety and paranoia. And yet I find comfort in fiction that is so dependent on anxiety and paranoia and fear and disorder. So I don't know what the hell that's about. There's something like, I actually find horror very comforting.
Yeah. The joys of escapism, hey?
Yeah. Escaping into a horror. It's a weird concept.
Yeah, for as long as I can remember, I've loved horror movies and books, even like whether it was, being like 8 or 9 and actually seeing like a slasher movie for the first time, or when I was younger and you watch like the little kid Saturday morning cartoon version of horror, which is like the animated Tales from the Crypt. I've just always been really, and I think Mike, you've mentioned similarly too, just like fascinated and intrigued by the macabre. And yeah, there's something really magnetic about just that total disorder, chaos. I don't know. It's I can't really put my finger on why though either. Just the fact that you find some degree of comfort in watching things and reading things that rile you up and induce anxiety and fear. I don't know. Maybe it's just something we've taught ourselves. Who knows?
But it doesn't it also feel like, I don't know, for me it's like it's always been there. I've just always liked dark shit. I don't know why. It's just I've been drawn to it. I don't know. Like I was born this way.
Yeah. I don't want to sound too like I've been emotional and goth from a very young age, but when I was a kid, I had a tree house, And it was a long, like I'm talking 4 years old, a long battle with my parents as to why I couldn't paint the inside of it black. Like you can't see anything in there, and I wanted it to be like Skeletor's castle. So eventually they relented, and I think it just became filthy because I couldn't see anything that needed to be cleaned or tidied up. So in that sense too, it was a win.
Nice.
I'm not trying to sound like I'm like Robert Smith from The Cure, very like sitting there with my like nest of hair brooding in the darkness. But I don't know, like just to echo Mike's sentiment, it's just a fascination that's always been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Aaron had a question. What horror movie or book scared you the most?
Well, for me, it was I wasn't allowed to watch any movies when I was a kid. But I had one cousin. I lived in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada, and I had one cousin who lived a little bit north of me in a city called Calgary. And sometimes I would get to go up to his house and just stay there without my parents. And he could, at least in my opinion, he could do anything, including watch movies at night. So when I was, I can't remember exactly how young I was, but one night after his parents were in bed, we watched The Exorcist. And I don't think I slept for 10 years after that. I mean, it just fucked me up. Sorry, am I allowed to swear on it?
Yeah, you're good. Yeah.
It just messed me right up.
That'd be the first swear ever on YouTube, Randy.
It would be.
Crossed a new threshold. Yeah.
I'm glad to confirm because I've been swearing constantly. So, I mean, The Exorcist seems to be like universally everyone saw it way too young. I was 12, I think, when I saw it. Like I snuck downstairs and watched it as part of. There used to be something called Friday Night Frightmare on the Space Channel. Do you remember that, Neil?
Yeah.
And it just like fundamentally shook me to the core. So.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything beyond seeing The Exorcist at age 12 to do something.
Yeah, that one's still a staple for me. I've always loved that. I think the first one that truly terrified me was I had a friend when I was 8 in grade 3. And I just remember going to a sleepover at his house, and his parents were like, "You're allowed to watch R-rated movies, right?" And like as though like they were confirming something that was obvious. So 8-year-old me just went, "Yes, of course." And so we watched the Halloween 4, and then we watched Alien and The Thing. So that was very trial by fire. And then I also I think the pouches under my eyes all came from that one night. Yeah. That's when Randy woke up with a beard the next morning after the
and it was black the night before.
Yeah.
Lord of Darkness was another one for me. No.
Oh,
yeah.
The Carpenter. Prince of Darkness?
Prince of Darkness.
Prince of Darkness.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That was another one I watched. I wasn't as young, but
I have a weird one. And I wonder if any of you can relate to this. E.T. terrified me as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I could see that.
Yeah, it's kind of directed like a horror scene at times. Like when Elliot is like paralyzed with fright, he's trying to call his brother, but he's so scared that his voice won't come out. And you see this little squat potato-y thing.
Yeah.
He's creeping toward him. Like, Spielberg, what the fuck, man? Yeah, that comes to that. And I had nightmares about E.T. So that's another one.
Similarly, in terms of maybe things that weren't supposed to scare you, but did. I don't know if you remember the War Amps commercials where there was the droid that's sort of jumping through the gears and circuitry, and it cuts its arm off, and it goes, "I can put my arm back on, you can't." I was haunted by this, and it was just for like it was an advertisement for playing safe. But I hallucinated at this one time when I got this fever when I was also very young, and I thought this armless droid was chasing me around the house. That was really only created, I think, to encourage children to play safe, but it's terrifying. If you haven't, I don't know if it's.
Yeah, but you were
Canadian. Yeah, it's true. I'm both my arms still, but if it might be a Canadian TV thing. But look on YouTube for. I'm sure if you looked up like War Amps Robot 1980s, you'll see how it could scar a child for sure.
Sid and Nancy really scared me too. It's
Oh
not
yeah.
horror, but I don't know. Maybe not. It distressed me.
Yeah.
Killer Clowns from Outer Space scared the shit out of me. I don't know. It's supposed to be a funny movie, but I was.
Wow.
set me
Kind
on
of
a path.
weird.
Yeah, strange one.
Just the way that they move in that movie, just that kind of jittery puppet movement of the eras. There's something unsettling about that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some sleepless nights after that. Chris said, horror movies are a genre that encourage creativity at their core. The vicious and nasty play with the fun and inventive.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Well said.
Carlos said, a good noir novel that Barry Gifford recommended is Black Wings Has My Angel by Elliot Chase.
I'm going to
Really
write that
something.
one
Yeah,
down.
I'm gonna do the same thing.
I don't know that one.
Me too, Mike. I'm very soothed by horror.
I think that's Megan. I think if that's you, hey Megan, glad to know I'm not alone.
It makes me feel better to read the worst thing that could possibly happen. I hear a lot of true crime fans feel the same way about that.
Yeah.
Could be.
I find true crime stuff comforting too. Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm. And it's real. That's what's so weird about it, that we
I
find it
know.
comforting. Yeah. Carl said, Poltergeist, always love that one. They're here.
Mhm.
Masterpiece.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
absolutely.
And before we wrap up, Randy, I wanted to ask you, and Neil too, is you were in a band together, and I wondered how the music industry has changed over the course of the last several years. If because you were very popular on indie radio, and I wonder how that's changed over the course of the last however many years.
Well, I guess it depends how many years we're going back. But man, Neil, has it ever changed since the advent of well, first of all, digital technology completely revolutionized the music industry, because now I have a studio. This is part of my basement studio, and I now have a digital version of what would have cost, I don't know, 500,000, probably $500,000 in the 70s and early 80s. So one thing is that has become a lot more do-it-yourself, a lot more DIY, and then that digital and in the realm of the interwebs just put that whole thing on steroids, right? So bands can have so much, and musicians, and for that matter artists of all types, can have so much control over their career.
Mhm.
But I don't know, I think the downside of that is now there are so many musicians that you almost can't see the good stuff for the noise, or it's hard, because there aren't the kind of filters that there used to be. So it's a bit of good and a bit of bad. I think much more good than bad myself. I'm willing to wade through a lot of dross on, say, SoundCloud to find that one genius somewhere in Brazil who's making some bizarre music that I just love and I would have never heard of otherwise.
Yeah.
I love that.
So hard to filter through everything though, hey? Like just there's such an abundance of stuff out there. It's nuts.
Yeah.
For context, I was going to say too, for Randy and I playing together, when Randy wrote Arctic Smoke, just being the prolific human being that he is, he wanted to do a musical soundtrack for his novel. So I'd played bass in just a handful of, I wouldn't even say the term industry applies in what I did, because I think industry sort of suggests some sort of monetary compensation. But I've just been playing playing and touring in a small capacity in just punk bands for the last, I don't know, since I was 18 or so. But Randy came up with these, where they, like, it was kind of like performative as well, right? Like we were kind of caricatures as well to an extent. Yeah. So I played bass on a couple of the tracks, but Randy, just being someone who can play like 8 trillion instruments, had just come up with all these really cool musical ideas, and I played bass on I think 3 or 4 of them. But that was a blast. And then going to this very small studio and recording it was just so cool. The amount that Randy can do with just a very small and limited amount of equipment, but just like knowing your stuff so well, just blew me away. It was very cool recording that stuff.
You wrote one of the tunes. I can't remember what it's called, but
yeah, me neither, but I did. I think I came up with the basis of one.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It was fun.
Oh yeah, that was a blast. That was very cool.
It's funny you guys mentioned that there's so much music out there, because I hear people say there's no good music anymore. It's like, well, if you listen to the radio or popular, you're not going to find it. You have to look for it. There's a ton of music out there.
Oh, there's more and better music out there, I think, ever. And I think, part of the thing is kids, by kids, I mean, anyone under the age of 20, as they're in their formative years composing and learning, they look up stuff on YouTube, and there's this kind of resonance or feedback where they can develop so much more fully than we ever could have. And they come up with fascinating new subgenres and mashups. And you're right, there's just so much good stuff out there. It's just a matter of, it's difficult to find, or can be difficult. Can be easy too.
Spectre said, same here with seeing R-rated movies around 8 years old, whenever HBO first started. Thanks, HBO.
Thanks, HBO.
I recently saw Sharp Objects on HBO for the first time. I think I was telling both you guys, and that one actually really scared me, which is an experience I don't have that much anymore.
That's with Amy Adams, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I sort of saw the ending coming, but at the same time, just the way it was shot and edited, it terrified me.
Yeah, I remember you giving me a heads up about that, and I couldn't have prepared myself for what it was. I remember just shooting up from my seat, and I hadn't had such a response to something like that for a very long time.
Thanks, HBO. Thank you.
I can't remember the movie that scared me, but the book Communion by Whitley Stiebler creeped me out. I got rid of it the day I finished it and haven't looked at it since.
The movie adaptation of that is great. I haven't read the book, but the Chris Walken movie from '89, I think, really good.
Oh yeah,
weird movie. He's like dancing with aliens at the end. It's very trippy. It's like almost a psychedelic movie.
Huh. Spectre said, yes, Poltergeist. I'm afraid of toy clowns under my bed. Clowns will always be creepy.
Who was the first one to figure that out? Like, you sort of think Stephen King and It, but somebody before that must have thought, man, clowns, there's just something wrong with that.
Did anyone ever not realize it? Like, how would someone think covering their face in white paint and leering at children?
Laughing maniacally.
Yeah, exactly. That's not my kind of fun.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Yeah. Thanks again for the insight.
Yeah.
Also, my grandpa told us scary ghost stories before bed. The one that the ghost hand under your bed, waiting to get you. Yeah.
Go, Grandpa.
Yeah. Thanks, Grandpa. Yeah. Well, I think we could talk. We can go on forever, but I know you all have stuff you have to do, and I want to respect your time. I want to thank you all for coming to hang out. It's been just a total blast. So, but Randy, where can people find you? Where is the best place to connect with you?
Probably just go to my website. It's Nikkel Schroeder, all one word.com. That's probably the easiest. Or I think you could find me quite easily on Facebook or any of the others.
Yes.
Twitter.
And all the links are in the description too. So anybody watching or listening. Yeah. And Mike, where's the best place to find you?
Website is MikeThornWrites.com. I'm Mike Thorn Writes on Twitter and Instagram. I'm on Twitter a fair bit, so that's probably the easiest. I'm also on Facebook. So yeah, all over this thing we call the internet.
Neil, where can people find your new book, There Are Wolves Here Now Too?
You can get it at, in Canada, like Chapters and Indigo would have it. I'd encourage anyone, if they are willing to check it out, to get it from an independent bookstore wherever they live. You can get it at Lex Luthor's Book Emporium, aka Amazon. I think Jeff Bezos has a few copies right now. But yeah, just the usual places that books are sold. And then you can find me online. I just do Twitter, so my name at Twitter, or I'm on Instagram as well. So if you search me up, there's either my photo will come up, or I think there's a young Irish juggalo that has like the same name. So just choose the one that looks like me. And yeah, that would be my handle.
Neil, you can get Neil's book from the New West.
Oh yeah, duh. Well. Geez, sorry, a horrible salesperson here. Yeah, New West Press, which is the publisher that put out Randy and I's books. Yeah, you can get it directly from the publisher. Yes,
awesome.
Yes, yeah.
Great stuff. Well, thank you all again so much. I really
Thank you,
appreciate
Steve.
you taking
Thank you,
some
Steve.
time to
Yeah.
come hang out and
It's a
chat
great
horror
show.
and books. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Let's do it again soon.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you
Anytime,
very
yeah,
much,
that'd be
man. Yeah,
blast.
much appreciated.
And thanks
Great.
everyone who came by to interact with us in the chat. It's always great when we have the back and forth. So thank you for spending your Friday evening with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hope everyone has a great weekend.
Okay,
So
thanks.
long.